Hello and welcome. My name is Bryce Stevenson. I'm the elementary school counselor here at P.K Yonge, and this is our final webinar of the 2020 calendar year. Our topic today is suicide prevention, and I'm happy to be joined by Amanda DiLorenzo Garcia, who's the mobile response coordinator at the Alachua County Crisis Center. The Alachua County Crisis Center is providing crisis services both face-to-face and over the phone in our community for over 50 years now. And they're a great resource to have and to be able to collaborate with to bring you the most up-to-date information and the best support that we possibly can during any time, much less this time. This is a really difficult conversation, and it's something that we know. This isn't the optimal way to kind of have this conversation too. Both the school and the crisis center, as Amanda is going to say, we really like to have this in person as a face-to-face conversation and less of a one-way kind of information dump. And so this isn't perfect, but this is the best we can do, and we still want this information to be out there. Just know that this is the beginning of the conversation. This isn't the end. We would like to get back to face-to-face conversations about suicide prevention and other difficult topics as soon as it's safe to do so. So hopefully early next year, at some point next year, we'll be able to talk about this in person and be able to build the skills, exchange the information, and talk about our experiences so that we can learn more about how we can prevent suicide, both in our school community and in our greater communities. Today's webinar is a little bit different because of scheduling conflicts. We weren't able to get Amanda for a live audience. And so instead, we're just going to play a short clip that she recorded. It's about 20 minutes long, going through the basics of what is suicide, what does suicide look like, what is someone who is suicidal, what do they look like, what are they acting like, what are they doing, what are they saying, and what are things that we as adults can do to help them. It's 20 minutes. After that, I'll come back, give you some resources, and that'll be it. I'll turn it over to Amanda now, and I hope you learned something from this conversation.
Hello, P.K Yonge families, parents, and caregivers. I'm Amanda DiLorenzo Garcia, and I work with the Alachua County Crisis Center. We're going to be talking about suicide prevention for youth in this webinar. And so I want to offer, before we even dive into the content, a reminder to take care of yourselves as this discussion continues. So what that might mean is taking a break if you feel overwhelmed or triggered by this information. It might mean reaching out to a partner, spouse, or friend to have a conversation if you're feeling distressed or overwhelmed. It might also just mean taking a break for some water and going for a walk before returning to this presentation. If needed, the Crisis Center's number is 352-264-6789, and that is a 24/7 number. And so I'll review that number at the end of the presentation as well. So let's begin by jumping into the content around what is suicide and suicide ideation. And suicide is a death caused by self with self-directed injurious behavior with the intent to die. And so we'll say completed suicide for those who have taken their life through suicide. Suicide is one of the top causes of death for youth for ages 15 to 24. It is the second leading cause of death as of 2017. And so when we're talking about this in relation to your youth and your student, we're really considering the warning signs in this webinar and what to be looking for to prevent that statistic from happening. Throughout this presentation, you might hear me say suicide ideation. And what I mean by that definition are suicidal thoughts. So this is when someone might think to themselves, I just want to die, or I don't want to be here anymore. And those thoughts are called suicide ideation. It's the idea of completing suicide. So why does suicide happen? And if we were live and in person, I would ask you for what you think. And so if you want to take a minute, even consider what are some of your initial thoughts about why suicide happens. You're welcome to write those down or just kind of think through what comes to mind for you. And so suicide happens when the level of pain that someone is feeling becomes intolerable, just becomes overwhelming. So another way to say that is that their suffering has become intolerable. And oftentimes when I have conversation with folks that are contemplating completing suicide or experiencing suicide ideation, they're talking about their pain and suffering and how it's overwhelming for them and how it's reaching a breaking point potentially. So we want to recognize that that's what causes suicide, is that their level of pain becomes too much for them. And I always like to remind people who are experiencing suicide ideation or family and caregivers of youth that people are not alone in those suicidal thoughts, that a lot of people experience them, and they're caused by many different things, including life transitions. So that might be a student who's transitioning from one grade level to the next, or elementary school to middle school or high school. Those transitions are new and scary and might kind of disrupt their equilibrium in their environment. And so we want to be looking for those major life transitions. The loss of a loved one can be very distressing for an individual, or the loss of an important relationship. It might be that a family member or loved one is deployed in the military. It might be a breakup of a young romantic relationship. It might be the loss of a friendship when a friend moves away for them. So thinking about the things that your youth are going through and how they might be experiencing it. And suicide might feel like, or be in their mind, the only solution for the pain that they're experiencing. And really what we want to communicate with folks is that it's not the only solution, and we're able to support one another. And hopefully by looking at the preventative signs, that we're able to acknowledge what someone is going through and the difficulty that someone is going through before it becomes intolerable. So we're going to review some of the warning signs of suicide, and there's a good handful here. So I'm just going to highlight the ones that I really want to speak to and make you aware of. Just give me a moment to bring all of these up. So one of the most important things to be looking for and listening for is if someone is talking about wanting to die or kill themselves. It might be a discussion, it might be a statement that's just put out there. Could also be a post on social media, so Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. It might be a hashtag that they use. So going back the past few years, the hashtag SUE, SUE, was representative of someone contemplating suicide. So being aware of what's being posted on your students' social media accounts and being aware of what they're maybe trying to express there. It might come up for them. They might express it through journaling or art. So if they're saying that they want to die or kill themselves, that's something to take very seriously and have a conversation about. Feelings that might come up that are indicators for suicide are hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness. So if they're hopeless, they might be feeling like they're at the bottom of the well. There isn't a way out. There isn't joy in their life and the things that they enjoy. Being helpless, that they think that no one can help them or support them, and that they're afraid to burden the ones that they love. And this idea of burdening with what is going on for them, and therefore they're rendered helpless. And oftentimes that takes a kind of encouragement and validation that we care, that we want to be there to support them. And then a sense of worthlessness or not belonging, that they don't really have something to share, some identity to share, a place to share where they just belong and fit in, that they don't have an inherent worth. And so if we're seeing displays of these emotions, or if there's something said that indicates some of these emotions, we want to be aware that those are indicators of suicide ideation. And so thinking about someone, a youth talking about being trapped in an unbearable pain, or being trapped in their helplessness, and it's becoming intolerable, those are signs too of suicide. Self-destructive behavior is important to point out. If we're seeing a youth wanting to hurt themselves or engaging in risky behavior like substance abuse, those are indicators and possible risks for suicide to be aware of. And then we want to be aware of youth's interests and loss of interest in things they love. And so I always like to preference this with youth might, depending on their age, might want to try new activities and therefore lose interest in others. So thinking about a youth that loves to do sports and has done basketball their whole life and then wants to try out football or wrestling or track or ballet or whatever it might be. And so it's the loss of interest and disengagement. And I often say to look for re-engagement. So if they're trying out something new, even though they've lost interest in what they once really enjoyed doing, but have re-engaged in something else, that's kind of a natural process. But if you see that they're just disengaging and losing interest in all the things that they've loved or people that they've enjoyed hanging out with and are kind of isolating themselves, something to be very cautious of. And so being attentive to what your student is involved in and what they care about doing to know when those behaviors change and are adjusting is very important. And then we always want to look out for if they're giving away their possessions, especially prized possessions that they care about. That's a sign that they're considering suicide. So even if it's something like a prized stuffed animal or favorite game, that they're kind of making a plan in that way to not be here any longer, to enjoy that item for themselves potentially. And so that might issue a conversation as well. And so I have this acronym here to share with you all of kind of a way to remember what to look out for from those previous warning signs. So it's faces, and the F is feelings, faces. And so what were some of those emotions that were mentioned on the last slide? And hopefully you can think of a few of those. So when we think of feelings, we think of potentially helplessness, hopelessness, and worthlessness. And we think of lack of purpose or belonging. For the A of faces, we think actions. So actions that your youth might be engaging in. So potentially substance abuse, being bullied or bullying, or potentially both. And then self-harm behaviors. Those are things to be cautious of. Changes that we're paying attention to. So the quitting of activities, loss of interest in things that they once loved, and even more so without re-engagement in new things to support them and re-engage them. Expressions. So these are the things that your student might say or express through social media or journaling or art. So I want to kill myself might be one of them. I just don't want to be here anymore. I want to die. For really young kids, sometimes if they lost someone that they love, it might be, I want to be in heaven with grandma, grandpa, auntie, or whomever it may be who passed away. So those are some of the things that you might hear that can alert you to need to have a conversation with your student. And then situations. So these are the situations of loss and grief, loss of relationships. As mentioned before, it might be a romantic relationship, a breakup, a friend moving away and losing contact, loss of life of someone that they love. Or it can be something like, in terms of situations, disappointment. So your student might be greatly disappointed in themselves if they didn't do as well as they needed to on an important exam or in a class that they cared a lot about, or potentially losing a competition, athletic or extracurricular, that they prepared a lot for and really put their heart into. And those things can be very overwhelming for a youth. And so paying attention to their behaviors and changes and expressions around those life events and situations is very important. So let's remember our acronym of FACES: feelings, actions, changes, expressions, and situations for suicide prevention. So how to talk to youth about suicide. This can be a very uncomfortable conversation or terrifying conversation. However, it might be one of the most important conversations a person can have with another individual. So we want to make sure that we're being genuine and authentic and sharing our concern appropriately with our student, their child. And so that might just sound like, I just really want to check in with you because I'm worried about you right now, and letting them know that you're coming from a place of care and concern. Asking open-ended and non-judgmental questions. So bringing our curiosity into what's going on from their perspective and their worldview. It might sound like, what's been going on for you lately? What has this been like for you? And so really focusing on their experience and what's happening in their world. Asking directly about suicide. So if you think that your child or your student is experiencing suicide ideation, you might ask very directly and openly, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about completing suicide? And hearing what your student has to say. It might be a no, might be a yes, I've thought about it, but I would never do that. Might be a yes, I've thought about it quite a bit. And that begins the conversation and opens the door to the conversation. Again, it can be very scary, but we really want to take away the taboo of these conversations so that that question can be asked even routinely if it's necessary with your student, or kind of more openly in the future if they're going through something, and having these conversations without a stigma around it or without feeling weird about it, that this is something that can be talked about with you as a safe adult and loving adult in their life. Throughout the conversation, despite the discomfort, to stay calm and to stay present. Really listen to what they have to say in the moment, keeping kind of in tune for yourself that they are with you, that they are present in your space, that you can see that they are safe in this moment, and so that you can just have this conversation. Take them seriously with everything that they say. So even if it seems like something that they'll just get over, or it'll get better in time, to take them seriously in the moment. So thinking about potentially a breakup, that in your adult mind and in my adult mind, we know that there might be other fish in the sea or someone else out there for them in the future. But for them, it can feel like the end of the world. It can feel like this was the everything relationship. And so we really need to take their experience very seriously and how heavy it feels for them. That's just one example. So kind of seeing it from their perspective or walking in their shoes in it. And then keep talking about it. Just because we ask the question about suicide or we get a little bit of information doesn't mean the door is closed. It's an opportunity to keep talking about what's uncomfortable and what's worrying you, and probably what's on their mind too. And so keep asking open-ended questions of, what was that like? What happened there? How was that for you? And just kind of let them explore that with you. Hold that conversation for as long as possible, so that they know that they can keep talking about it. And even, as that conversation starts to close, if it feels complete in that you can say, this is something we can come back to, even though, it feels like we're at a closing point for it now. We can talk about this again later on today, tomorrow. This is so important, and I want to keep hearing what this is like for you and how you're going to grow through this. So depending on that answer around, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? We kind of need to ask more questions and get some more information. So particularly if the answer is yes, or yes, I've thought about it, or even no, you might want to explore that a bit more. But particularly around the yeses, we want to ask, well, when are you thinking about completing suicide? When are you thinking about doing that? What is your idea about that timeline for you? And so you're kind of asking, how much longer can you tolerate the pain that you're going through? And see what they have to say. It might be, I was thinking about doing it today. I was thinking about doing it this afternoon. I was thinking in a few days, maybe. I was thinking about next week. And so hearing what their timeline is, that lets you know the immediacy. Although anytime that they're sharing that, please follow up and seek support. But it gives you some insight into what's going on. And then you want to ask how. You want to find out what their plans are, what their thoughts are. And this might sound like them thinking about taking pills, or using knives or sharp objects that they have in the house. And so this gives you some insight on some ways that you might keep them safe in the meantime while you all seek additional help. So it might be removing the knives from the house, or putting the pills in a locked space so that they can't get access to them. And then, of course, always seek that additional help. And so that could be the crisis center, which we have a 24/7 access line to a phone counselor with that phone number on the screen, 352-264-6789. It might be reaching out to a school counselor after the immediacy of the crisis line. It might be contacting a medical doctor, psychiatrist, if that's who you've worked with before. But if you're unsure, a great place to start and something that's always available to you in the Alachua County area and community is the crisis line. And so we want to let you know that we're there for you. We're there for your student. We're happy to talk to you as a parent on the phone. We're happy to talk to your student if they're willing to be on the phone and talk with us and talk them through it. And our phone counselors can help with that. So thank you all for taking the time to be a part of this webinar and listen to some information around prevention. I recognize that this is a very heavy and troubling topic for many. And so if you're concerned, if you want more information, please reach out to the crisis line. Additionally, take some time potentially after you complete this webinar and start to close down to take care of yourself. And so again, that might look like taking a few minutes to drink some water, listen to a favorite song, journal, go for a walk, connect with your spouse or partner or family, enjoy some time with your family, maybe a movie or some games. However you relax and enjoy that, this was a heavy topic and you deserve to. I wish I could address questions, but if there's something that you need to know about our center or our services, please give that crisis line a call. All right, thank you again for being here today.
We are so grateful to Amanda and the Crisis Center for being able to provide that talk. Like I said earlier, their knowledge is unparalleled. They're one of the leading crisis centers in the entire country, and they kind of innovated the industry, the practice of crisis intervention. And so we're so lucky to have them as a resource in our community. I wanted to run through some of the contact information that she talked about, as well as contact information specific for our school about how we can assist you best if you want to have more conversations about this topic. If you're worried that someone, your student or someone that you know is suicidal, there are some resources that can help you. The number to the Alachua County Crisis Center at the very top. They're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a year, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They are always staffed around the clock. There's always someone who's available to talk to. The National Suicide Hotline number is underneath that. If you call that with a 352 area code or in this Gainesville area, you will likely be connected to the Alachua County Crisis Center. They are a part of that network. But that number will always work regardless of where you are. The top number will always work regardless of you are. Sometimes you may need more localized services. There's the National Crisis Text Line. This is great for maybe your student who wouldn't want to talk to someone over the phone, or they feel uncomfortable talking over the phone and they prefer to text. That's also available. You text home to 741-741. Your PKY school counselors are always available to talk about this with you or with your student if you feel like that needs to happen. Sarah Tice and Caleb Chambliss are the high school counselors. Madison Schmidt is the middle school counselor, and me, Bryce Stevenson, I'm the elementary school counselor. Feel free to contact any of us at any time if you need help or assistance or just need to have a conversation about this. And then as always, if there is a suicide in progress or other emergency situation, 911 may be your best resource. If someone needs an immediate medical intervention, 911 is always a resource. A lot of the 911 dispatchers are trained in crisis response protocols, and they'll be able to help in that situation too. So if these other resources aren't appropriate, 911 may be the most expedient and life-saving resource that's available to you. Thank you for watching this webinar. Again, this is a difficult topic, but something that's very important and very meaningful to kind of change the culture around and be able to talk about. Like I said, this is just the beginning of the conversation. We would love to continue this conversation in the future. Please let us know. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.